Should you buy Cyberpunk 2077 in 2021? Cyberpunk 2077 was one of the most hyped games of last year, but released in an absolute tragic state. Bugs plagued every corner and console performance was some of the worst I've ever seen. How could Cdprojekt Red, the developers of arguably the game of the generation, The Witcher 3, release an absolute broken mess of a game that required patch after patch to get working? That was Cyberpunk 2077 released initially, but is Cyberpunk 2077 finally worth your cash in 2021? We'll be talking narrative and gameplay. Welcome to Classic Game Reviews, where we go back in time and take a look at the games of the past, and today's game is
Cyberpunk 2077.
Cyberpunk 2077 has a narrative that only a game set in the genre can actually pull off. Massive corporations taking over the world is often a plot point used by many different genres, but I don't know what it is, but Cyberpunk really nails that vibe. However, world building doesn't mean it has a great narrative. Let's start with themes. Cyberpunk's themes vary from basic revenge to multi-layered depths of manipulation, meaning of life and death, and ultimately, what makes something human. While the story is not executed flawlessly, it still explores these themes fairly in depth, forcing you to experience various scenarios and ask questions that relate to the themes I just mentioned. I don't know about you, but if you are looking for a narrative that is fairly deep but doesn't last 50 hours, Cyberpunk definitely offers that if you can look past the flaws. A major flaw in the narrative, I think, is its structure. Cyberpunk 2077 does not follow a traditional narrative. The opening title sequence happens almost 3 to 4 hours into the game, giving you the impression this game will be way longer than it actually is. The writers basically skipped your traditional opening of around 30 minutes for a game into a 4-hour quality intro to the world and its characters. I can say with absolute confidence that the opening hours of Cyberpunk 2077 are the best for both gameplay and narrative. The narrative picks up heavily towards the end, which really surprised me, as the middle section of the narrative slowed right down and got quite tedious towards the end, but the ending did make it all worth it for me personally, but it definitely depends on how many RPGs you play and how many options you want. But the options that are given are actually quite in-depth and, have a lot of consequences and a lot of good and sad moments, so it's definitely worth it in the end, in my opinion. The bugs will take you out the story significantly if you can't look past them, as they genuinely are still around every corner if you look for them, even to this day. The script is pretty good most of the time and really is suited for your Keanu Reeves' Johnny Silverhand due to the guy's cool-ass delivery, even if it is a bit basic and, very samey. This is also an RPG, so if you do have various choices, but it really only affects the overall ending you get. But even still, those final decisions in the narrative are easily the most important and hold the most consequences. So have a think and see if a 15 to 20 hour story would suit your entertainment needs, or if you want a game that gives you a lot more options and each decision throughout the game is going to affect your ending. It does in a way affect Cyberpunk's ending, but at the same time those decisions, they seem at first very impactful, but once you look up the other endings, really there's only like 2 or 3 potential options in each section where you get to choose, like between a person or like Panam or Judy or whatever, but that's all up to you guys. So it really isn't as in depth as it wants to be, but that it is what it is. The characters are actually pretty good in my opinion. Speaking of Panam and Judy, the best characters in my opinion is actually V, our main character, Johnny Silverhand, Panam Palmer, Judy, and Takashi. Or Takashi, I can't really remember how to pronounce his name properly. Those characters in particular get fleshed out pretty well, with the standouts being Johnny and Panam in my opinion. Johnny has a great arc, as well as your character V during the game, and the ending, despite the flaws of the narrative, make the whole experience worth it, as I've mentioned countless times in this video. Unfortunately, a lot of characters do get pushed to the side and do become quite forgettable towards the end, which isn't helped by its, honestly, pretty awful pacing. Overall, the narrative for Cyberpunk 2077 is honestly the best part of the entire game, since it's very clear that there was a vision for it, despite the rumours of countless reboots. So if you just want a cool RPG experience with Keanu Reeves in a Cyberpunk game with awesome technology, then Cyberpunk 2077 is definitely worth buying, in my opinion. I gotta be honest, the gameplay here is an absolute shit show. I know I will annoy a lot of people who defend this game, but the gameplay here is some of the buggiest, broken, and half-assed mechanics I have ever had the experience of playing in a full budget AAA game. The amount of bugs, you really expect this from like a very low budget, very ambitious studio. I have no idea how this game was genuinely allowed to release. Various elements of the game are still missing, entire train stations still don't exist, and a massive chunk of this city is still not available despite being in the demos that were released. It's not all bad though, a lot of the weapons are awesome. They feel impactful and have some really unique designs while staying grounded to the cyberpunk genre, or at least as grounded as you can get. However, everything surrounding the core gameplay loop isn't explained very well and is implemented so poorly. It is such a punch to the player's gut because those gameplay elements are there, but they are so underused or simply not viable, so what's the point of even using them? I didn't use the enhanced jump ability once, and I didn't use melee weapons, but it's complicated for me because that was my choice. So those gameplay elements that I think were poorly implemented may be some of the best parts for other players, but the point is that the game doesn't respect your time. You have to go through the system, you have to look it up, you have to figure out how it all works without it being explained to you properly. I know some people like things not being explained to them, me as well, but when it comes to like proper gameplay mechanics like melee systems and customization, it needs to be explained somewhat to the players. There is one thing that everyone will agree with unanimously, and that's the fact that bugs and performance absolutely destroy the fun this game can provide at its best moments, even on PC. Those opening hours I mentioned in the narrative section is the same for gameplay. Those opening hours are easily the best moments during the entire experience due to its simplified design, which helps avoid so many bugs that appear in the later sections. Driving has been fixed, thank God, making the system feel more reactive and actually feels like the vehicles have some weight to them, making it a more enjoyable experience. Performance has been somewhat improved on consoles, but I can really only go off what I've seen in the update videos. But the FPS on PS4 seems to be a lot more stable now, but I wouldn't personally risk it. Cyberpunk is clearly not optimized for PS4 or Xbox One, which is just tragic due to the studio's success technically with The Witcher 3. Cyberpunk 2077 is very clearly still broken in many ways when it comes to gameplay. Hit registry still doesn't work properly, and the AI in many scenarios are some of the dumbest I've ever seen. Despite these negatives, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I still enjoyed myself. I can't really explain why. I don't know if the narrative just pushed me through or there is genuinely a great game here, but it's covered in piss a lot of the time, which really ruins that experience. I just love the cyberpunk genre. I love films like Blade Runner and stuff like that, so maybe I'm just really biased to this kind of design or this kind of direction, but really is just my kind of thing, which is probably why I enjoy it more than most. There is plenty of customization for guns, etc., but for some reason the character creator was genuinely really disappointing, only offering what I would consider the basics for customization. Also, what sort of game lets you create a character, but doesn't allow a third person perspective to actually see your masterful work, you absolute Chad? Overall, the gameplay isn't great, but if you choose to play it in a simple way without focusing on the half-assed fake mechanics, then I genuinely think you will have a great time. But due to the negatives, I simply cannot in good conscience recommend you to buy Cyberpunk 2077, even to this day. There is too many bugs, and it still isn't worth the money you have earned. Thank you for watching.